Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm thankful to be speaking to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. My name is Nathaniel Straathof, and I'm a project manager for the City of Vancouver's Facilities Development Group in the Department of Real Estate, Environment, and Facilities Management. And Kerry's agreed to join me here today from the Vancouver School Board's Vancouver Project Office. And we'll be telling you about this exciting mixed-use project that we're working on in Coal Harbour. The Coal Harbour Phase 2 project is a new facility currently under construction on the Vancouver waterfront that comprises an elementary school for 340 students, a childcare for 65 kids, and 60 units of non-market rental housing. Our site, if you're familiar with Vancouver, is bounded by Broughton Street on the west, Hastings Street on the south, Jervis Street on the east, and the Coal Harbour seawall on the north. It's right on the waterfront. The story that we plan to focus on today is about the partnerships that ultimately finalize the project's viability. But the story of this project goes back further, and so I'll start with some context. During the 1990s, the City of Vancouver received the land for our project as part of an agreement with a developer who built some condominium towers to the northeast of our site. And at that time, the city identified several needs that the site could support in the downtown community. They saw needs for a park, a community center, an elementary school, a childcare, and affordable housing. Cities need a lot of things. And in an increasingly urbanized city center, new projects have often needed to be mixed-use facilities in order to meet those community needs and to optimize the financial viability of the project. So the Coal Harbour Phase 1 project comprised a community center and a park and was completed around the year 2000. The Phase 2 project, for the other components, sat dormant for 20 years while awaiting funding. The housing and childcare are funded largely by community amenity contributions from condominium developments on nearby sites, with some provincial funding for the childcare and later on some federal funding for the housing. The City of Vancouver had partnered early on with Vancouver School Board during the 1990s for the Phase 2 component. And VSB schools are typically funded through the BC Ministry of Education. For this project, the catalyst that allowed the entire project to move forward in about 2019, 2020 was that the VSB had identified an asset on one of their neighboring properties, about 10 blocks from our site, that had unique value for another third party in the community. And the sale of that asset was able to provide funding for the school component, and that other party was BC Hydro. So the way that the City of Vancouver and the VSB and BC Hydro were able to make the project work for all parties was by considering community needs beyond our own project site. Kerry, could you please describe for us the general terms of that VSB agreement with BC Hydro?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kerry Chuah from the Vancouver School District. So as Nathaniel mentioned, our traditional way of getting funding is through the Ministry of Education and Childcare. But unfortunately, this Coal Harbour site is not on the priority list for the capital plan. So that's why we were looking for other funding. And we're very happy that BC Hydro, they approached us in 2018 that acquiring, they're showing their interest to acquire one of our sites that is below grade to build their substation. And then after some consultation and research on our own, then the board of our school district approved the sale. So that was really a win-win situation because we were looking for funding to fund the school. And then BC Hydro, they were also looking for another site to kind of like basically they need more power because their old substation is aging, so that's why they need a new site to basically supply electricity and power to the area. So it was really a win-win situation for all three parties, City of Vancouver, BC Hydro, and us. And then through the sale of the sub-service parcel, we were able to get some funding to fund Coal Harbour Elementary School and also the future Robert Stanek site, the replacement school over there. Back to you, Nathaniel.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. So I understand that this new substation in the West End is intended to replace the aging substation that's currently on Burrard Street. Um, seems like such a great agreement to me for BC Hydro to purchase the subgrade rights that still allows a school and play field to be on the site above the substation. Um, and it was very serendipitous for the project that we're working on together now. And it's got a lot of lessons that I think are useful for people who are interested in doing similar projects. And the lessons learned from this experience centered around partnership. So a set of interrelated needs were identified in the community, and the program on the site was designed for synergy among those needs. So the housing will be available at rents that will be affordable to people who might otherwise be priced out of the neighborhood. The school and the childcare will serve the needs of the residents in that affordable housing, as well as the broader community. And the housing residents and the school and childcare populations will become the fuller community that the community center and park were designed to serve. So with those needs identified, a partnership was formed to meet those very needs. Partnership between partners were optimally suited to deliver those facilities. The partners pursued funding for the project through their respective channels. And ultimately, the catalyst that made the project viable from a financial perspective was yet another community need, electricity. And all those community benefits became deliverable on our site and on the other school site because the potential of that neighboring site was brought into the equation. And so I'd say, in conclusion, not every developer will be able to call up BC Hydro and make a deal. So abstracting from that specific circumstance, the suggestions would be to consider community needs on any given project site and also well beyond that project site, and to look for partners or other parties who are optimally suited to deliver those community needs, and consider what those partners or other parties might be able to offer each other that make the complete package work.
Nathaniel, Kerry, did you want to add anything before I pass it off to the room to begin the discussion?
No, I think we're ready for questions.
Oh, great, awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And Coal Harbour Phase 2 is such a cool story. And all of you would have received the case studies that we did on the nonprofit and public housing developments. We published them earlier this year, and Coal Harbour was one of those case studies. If you're interested in learning the full story of Coal Harbour, I'd highly recommend that read. Are there any questions that are coming up that you need maybe like answered, clarified before we're able to dive in?
Sounds like there's a lot of partners in this. I really appreciate you sharing this. And can you talk about that? Like how there's a working group, I would assume, this is a multi-year project with, complexities and funding complexities. Like what's the backbone look like?
I would love to, I wish I had more context myself because a lot of the genesis of this project occurred in the 1990s. And all the people who participated in that have since moved on, and they're not really available here for me to ask questions of. So I have a bit of a paper trail from the pre-digital days. But I think that essentially it would have been that people in charge of planning and finance at the City of Vancouver at that time, who have ongoing collaborations with the school board, would have looked at the site and said, "What can we deliver?" And then I described how funding typically works for each of those components, and if it had been a different type of program, then the funding might have been from a different source. But I think that I think my guess is that identifying those needs was pretty easy because people are clamoring for them every day, and it was more a matter of how to put the funding in place, and that's why the phase 2 took 20 years.
I'll jump in with a question there if the floor is available. Great discussion, and thanks for bringing this to talk about. I guess my question would be sort of a carry along. I know obviously funding is a challenge everywhere, and resources are being highly competed for. sort of across multiple sectors and everything like that. So I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about what was the trigger that made this project possible in this location at this point in time, kind of thing. I mean, obviously the BC Hydro piece was mentioned already, but just curious if there's more information specific to that. Thanks so much.
Maybe, Kerry, I think I'll start and then I'll hand it over to you. I think that I think the funding for the housing and childcare components of this project were more flexible. Because the city has had a decades-long program of collecting community amenity contributions for developments in that neighborhood. That funding was more flexible, and it really was the school component that was facing a more of a challenge. And so the BC Hydro deal was very fortuitous. Kerry has said that it sounds like it was BC Hydro that approached the school board first, rather than the other way around. Maybe I can throw in one more thing before I ask her to comment on that. The City of Vancouver and the Vancouver School Board have several partnerships throughout the city. Most commonly, what that looks like is it's a childcare paid for by the city on top of a school paid for by the school board through the ministry. And so, because we have this ongoing conversation, and we're pleased with the results of our partnership. So that part of the deal, like the funding for the childcare and the housing, the partnership with the school board, that was all sort of strong from the beginning. This final piece sounds like it was initiated by BC Hydro. Kerry, do you have any more information about how that conversation was initiated?
I think all I know is BC Hydro, they knew that they needed a substation in Vancouver, and there weren't a lot of sites available. And then so they identify, the Roberts Annex school site. It could be a potential. That's why they came to us. But I'm pretty sure they have done a lot of research which location is viable, and then ultimately, down to a couple options, and they approached us. And then one more thing I want to say here is that we have enrollment pressure in the whole downtown Vancouver area, and also in the neighboring catchment. So we knew that we needed a school always at this site.
Mm-hmm.
And then partnering with City of Vancouver, it's also a win-win because there's some costs that we can share together to kind of help out each other too.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing so many mixed-use projects these days. So many of our housing projects have another component to them. Schools typically have some other component to them these days too, right? So I think that's the nature of densifying urbanism. But it's also worked very well in the city of Vancouver. I feel like, as a resident, it's made the city much richer to have these varied interlocking programs on every block of the city.
So I'm just really curious about having that social housing aspect with an elementary school and with a daycare. I mean, I know that's probably very common in more urban areas that are more dense, but in the smaller community that I work in, it's a kind of a new concept for community members that they do struggle with having say things that have services attached to them. I'm not sure if the social housing that you're talking about does have that attached, but close to daycares or elementary that are serving younger, more vulnerable populations, and vulnerable in a different way. So I'm just curious if there was any conversation throughout this project about having those things combined and how that relationship developed to ensure that everyone at the table was comfortable and on board with the project.
Yeah, it seems to me that we're seeing so much mixed use now. The question almost becomes, well, what can't you co-locate? What can't you co-locate? What can't you put with housing? Because everything else should be on the table. Because if it helps, it helps. Like what you see most commonly, especially in private developments, is you'll see commercial retail. But then, under the City of Vancouver's social housing program, we have co-located childcares, fire halls, I think that and the school, I think, is the first time this is actually happening, though. It's a first for us, and I believe it's a first for you as well, Kerry, right?
Yeah, first time
Yeah.
with housing. We have a lot
Yeah.
of collaborative project with childcare.
And so I think that complexity is complexity. And so you really need to work on it, not only from a planning perspective, but also an architectural perspective. Building systems as well. You know, this building ended up having to be internally divided into essentially 3 separate buildings, which takes a lot of planning and a lot of careful design. And I think that with good design, what you get is you get powerful synergy that really benefits everyone. And good design is the key.
Yeah, I want to also mention about the point that Nathaniel just mentioned is to we try to separate the system as much as we can, like different mechanical system, separate them, and then like entrance, we don't share elevator with housing, staircase and so on, because that makes the operation aspect easier down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And was there any like community engagement that happened throughout this? So like just having like the general community that this would be serving come to the table and discuss what that would look like. And did you have any negative responses at all? I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, most of the community engagement happened before I joined the city in this current role. I think there would have been some engagement back in the 90s that neither one of us would recall. I think, Kerry, you were part of some engagement shortly before I joined the project. So maybe you can add a couple words about how that all went. When I joined, the project was already in design development. And so what I remember is during the public hearing for the rezoning text amendment we had to do, there was some community opposition. Coal Harbour is a very affluent neighborhood and with a lot of towers. And there were some residents who were concerned that the new building would block some of their water view. And there were some residents who were concerned that having all those school children there might make the neighborhood more chaotic for pickup and drop off and noise and all that stuff. But ultimately, the project received unanimous support from council and also from the DP board. So although there was some community questions, it was clear that the neighborhood really wants this project. These are tremendous benefits the neighborhood's been clamoring for decades. And so it's very rewarding to be able to provide those. Kerry, do you want to add any words about those early public engagements before I showed my face?
Sure. So we did hear quite a bit of opposition, just like what Nathaniel mentioned. It was challenging, but I think the key is like what can we do to really address a lot of housing crisis. School, we're reaching a lot of enrollment pressure and things like that. And then like we understand that, and we're very happy that the community also like gave us feedback about their concerns regarding maybe like traffic jam and things like that. It was an open platform that, everybody can voice out during the public consultation phase. So, but at the end, as Nathaniel mentioned, the City of Vancouver Council, they approved their projects. And also internally within the school district, we also had a lot of internal engagement with the existing school communities. So that's why like we inform everyone to make sure that the project is transparent. Nobody gets surprised. So it's part of the important criteria for success of the projects.
Are some other models in this city where the housing for which there's very high demand and potential profit is used as the profit center that allows the other components, the needed amenities, infrastructure, social components to be built. And I guess for each piece of land and each organization, the parameters of what would be a mutually beneficial arrangement to provide housing, when really, if your real goal is to provide a crisis center, but the housing is the thing that allows that crisis center to happen, then I guess people would just be looking to see what type of arrangement would allow a partnership potentially with a real estate developer who could bring enough to the table, get enough out of it to make it mutually beneficial, and just make the deal work for everyone. And I guess I'm thinking of one thing that comes to mind is this massive Senac development that's happening in Vancouver at the south end of the Burrard Bridge. It's First Nations land. It's being built by a prominent local developer, I believe, for a fee, and the First Nation retains ownership of the land. And there's some sort of a deal about there'll be rental properties. It's a deal about how the rental income gets divided and how the use of those properties get divided between the First Nation and the developer. And they were able to find an agreement that worked for everyone. And it's going to be providing such a massive increase in the amount of rental housing in Vancouver that it'll be a benefit to the broader city as well. I guess maybe just hear myself talk, maybe there's a deep lesson here in a nation that is so constrained by a massive need for a tremendous amount of housing. Maybe the question is, like, should we be putting housing on everything? Like should every one of these other programs that we're talking about be co-located with a lot of housing? And in the past, even in Vancouver, but definitely through the rest of BC, density was a scary thing for people, and especially building tall worried people. Even in Vancouver today, there are certain neighborhoods where it's okay to build tall, and other neighborhoods where the entire neighborhood will become very anxious if you mention a tower. But we're slowly getting over that in this municipality, and I believe that there are some others around BC as well who are beginning to see the benefits of building dense. I must say, living in a dense city, I find the benefits are tremendous, and I wish that people who haven't experienced that would be less anxious about it. And I guess the other aspect was legislation. Legislation needed to permit that type of density. And I think there's a wave now of new legislation that's trying to do that to varying degrees. But maybe in this climate, it's a good time for people to lobby for more legislation. You know, if you needed a legislative change in order to get the density that you need to make your project work, this might be the best time in memory to push for it.